Okay, so our topic for this presentation is going to be basic cutting workflow. So, as many of you are familiar with already, the cutter manufacturers in most cases have a type of method to work with their information, cut information, whether it's a plugin in Illustrator or another third-party software that they're working with in order to create the cut data. So a lot of this information is a method for you to use that cutter manufacturer's cutting solution. What I want to show you today is working through the Onyx software and how we engage in working with cutting information. So one thing I'm going to start out with here is the essentials in getting things set up in the RIP. It's going to be in the RIP and it's going to be in CutServer. After we talk about that, we're going to get into setting up the file and preparing the file for the cut information. And we'll go through the workflow. So one thing we need in the RIP queue is we need to have a quick set that has the particular cutter model active and engaged as a selection. So I'm going to make a new quick set. I'll go up to Configure Printer. This is going to put me offline, and I'm not ripping or printing right now, so I will say yes. Here's my quick set tab. I'm going to make a new quick set. And in the left center section here, we see cutter options. And there's a bit of an outline around the cutter area. So contour cutter selection. By default, our quick set is at none. But in this pull-down window, you can see a variety of cutter manufacturers. So I'm just going to make a couple of different examples up. I'll go through and I'll create one for a very basic Graphtec cutter. So I'll select that choice for the model, Graphtec cutter, and then I'll be sure to give this an appropriate name for the quick set. Now the options below the contour cutter selection, there is use cutter path prefix, and that checkbox is on by default. Now remember, because the setting for our cutter model was at none, even though this checkbox is on, theoretically, there would be no cutter associated. So this would be an incomplete quick set, if you will. But just to say, we do have a cutter model selected at this moment. In the cutter path prefix designations, all of these different names are the names that will be the setting for the spot color in the design file, and how that is then going to go over to the Graphtec cutter and control the blade for cutting. So if we select the little gear on the right-hand side, we can see that all of the checkboxes are on by default. Now, these are all very commonly used terms in cutting. However, if there is a term that you do not see here and you wish to identify for your spot color that indicates the cut path, you would hit this plus symbol and you would add that. So I'm going to add our old familiar setting that we've used called cut contour. And again, you could add multiple settings in here. So the point to all of these names is this is going to be the name that's going to be associated in the file as the cut path. So we're going to have to make a spot color with this exact name, case and space sensitive. So you'll notice when we look at these names, they're either one words or there's an underscore that's there. So in a lot of these cases, as we're working with this, we have to be very careful about the naming convention going on. So again, the way we have our names and our settings is going to be the exact indicator for how this information is going to be treated and addressed as the cut information. So that's a big part of how things are going to be working in this fashion. Okay, so a few optional choices below that setting. These optional choices are truly case by case, just depends on what you're doing. For the most part, what we have set here by identifying the cutter model, by identifying the name of the spot color that will represent the cut data, that's pretty much where we're at, where we have a completed quick set. But let's talk about these other items that are here along the bottom. So the first choice, add PDF trim box to cut path. Okay, this is very exclusive or specific to having some information here. If you want to automatically designate the trim box of a PDF file as a cut path, this is going to be the setting. I check that on, it's automatically going to identify that. Now, some rules here, it has to be a PDF file coming into the RIP, and it'll take that trim box, if this is checked on, it'll take that trim box of the PDF and designate it as a cut path. The nice feature about this is it's automating it for us. We don't have to design that shape. It's going to automatically designate that trim box as a cut path. So thinking about some scenarios with the way you cut and the way you work, perhaps this could be a very useful feature. Okay, the next choice we have is to for tiles, generate the tile outline as a cut path. So again, we're taking files that we're tiling and that outline area where the tile ends and then there's just extraneous material that can be designated automatically as a cut path. Very convenient, does this for us by turning on that checkbox. Now this feature has a little gear, so this has some additional settings in here for control. In that gear, we can identify what should that cut path placement be based on: the original image edge, the bleed edge, or the trim box edge. We can also choke this value of this cut shape to be a little bit smaller, right? Choking that, skinnying that, making that smaller to just make sure we get maybe all of that image area for that tile. We could tell it to include the print label when it cuts. And then we can also tell it to trim away any overlap. So should we have any overlap going on in our tile, we can have that overlap trimmed away. And then what will we designate as the layer for that cut of the tile? We default to this pretty, specific name here, tile outline. It describes what that setting is, but there are some other controls and settings we can set as well. So again, the tile outline options, if we wanted to generate a cut path around those tile outlines, we can do that by turning on the checkbox. This gives us a gear of additional choices that we can control and configure. All right, and now our third choice, which is new in 21.1, is generate label outline cut path. So if we are using a label, it's going to automatically generate a cut path around that. If I look at the gear for optional choices here, we're only just identifying what will be that layer, cut path layer identifying. And this will be shown in Cut Server. What will that layer be seen as? And that's going to be a layer outline. Again, very simple naming convention for what it represents. Okay, so 3 little choices, very different to each other, very specific. And you can kind of think about some scenarios where possibly you'll be using these settings. For where we are right now in this new quick set, I've selected a cutter and I've set my naming conventions that I want to use. I've added cut contour for my cut path information. So that's my completed quick set. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now, maybe I have another setting in here, so I'll make another new choice. We'll go through and make up 2 different scenarios. So for something like this, maybe I'm going to grab a different cutter going through the workflow here. Grab something to this effect. And again, I can add that cut contour name that I just may be using for my name, representing my cut data, again, case and space sensitive. So I'll have that in there and I'll give this a proper name. Okay. So as you can see, we would need to make a quick set for each possible cutter model that we're going to be working with. That would be something that we would have to do. Okay. So that's our quick sets created. The next thing would be is to launch Cut Server. So in my upper left corner, I've got my application Cut Server. I'm going to double click that and get my Cut Server to come up. Now, the first time you launch Cut Server, because it's brand new and never been launched before, there are no cutters designated here. So this is where we can identify and add the cutter models that we're working with. So you'll see in this list, we may get a little bit more verbose as far as the cutter model goes. So I'll just grab like an older AD600, click OK. It adds that to the side column on the left. And I have more to add. I have a SUMA and I have to configure these as well. So I can go into Manage Cutters up here at the top and Cut Server. Again, this shows me the cutter I just added. I can add another cutter. So I'll look for my SUMA. And I think I grabbed the F series. So I'll grab a SUMA F series model and I'll add that. So again, we have a landing point, if you will, for those files to appear here. Our cut data would come across into these areas, into these fields when we use the appropriate quick set. Further configuration could be accomplished here in the Manage Cutters, or if we hit the gear for that specific cutter model. So here's our GraphTech. I'll select and hit Configure. And we want to configure this for communication. So what is the best, way we are communicating to this cutter model? Every cutter model will have different options. Some may be USB or TCP/IP on your network. Some you might be browsing to a folder across your network and locating, putting the file over to some other server. So just depending on what it is, which cutter model you have, will depend on these choices. So for example, if you did have a USB cable, which is common for this model, and you are plugged into the USB for the cutter to this RIP PC, when you click on the setup button, if you were connected and it was communicating, you would see that model of that GraphTech display here, FC8600, and then you would know you're communicating. TCP/IP setup, we would type in the IP address and port number. Typically, it could be 9100 by default, but these things could be varying at your shops. And we could hit test and make sure we get a green light. Now, I don't have this device connected, so I'm just going to say cut to file. And where this is going to write the file, it's going to go directly into my Onyx Thrive 21 folder, into a cutter folder. And then this default.cut, what that represents is it's going to create a folder for the GraphTech FC8600, and the cut files will remain in there. So keep in mind, I'm going to go with this directory path. Keep in mind, I'm demonstrating this with printers and cutters and devices. I don't have these, but I'm just demonstrating them. Really, you're going to set up your true communication method. I am just saying cut to file and going local to my computer. Now there's a choice for auto forwarding, automatically cut new files, forward the data. As soon as the cut file appears in this list, automatically push it over to the GraphTech FC8600, okay? Push the data over to the cutter. In some cases, this auto forwarding could be very convenient, and maybe at other times, it could be something that is maybe not as appropriate to be applied. So for something like this particular cutter model, we're going to print our file. At the time we are printing, the cut data will come over here to this left column under the GraphTech. Well, the file takes time to print. We get that print, we walk it over to the physical cutter, we load it in with the directional arrows properly. We get this location to find where those marks are. And then when we're ready, we would go to the bottom of the screen here in Cut Server, the very bottom center, and we would select our file and we would select Cut Now. And we would be pushing the data over because we have the print, we're ready, let's cut this information now. In some cases, if I turn this on to automatically send the file, as soon as the file is here in Cut Server, it's going to immediately get forwarded to the cutter's control panel hard drive, but the file is still printing, and maybe we're not ready to cut it just yet. Maybe we have other jobs that we're working on, and so on and so forth. So it's a situation where you're just going to think through when is the right time to apply this feature. If you are working with a cutter, flatbed style cutter, where there is a front end computer, and the front end computer is going to be communicating to the cutter, to the router, controlling the conditions, well, then maybe this directory for sending the file, we browse and we push our cut data all the way over our network to that front end computer, and we can tell this automatically send the file. And that could be convenient. So the cut information can stay here in the computer inside Cut Server, but then maybe we say, well, we can get that cut data immediately over to the front end computer, and it can wait there until we're ready to get our cut data, our file over there. And then that's a separate software that's controlling the flatbed cutter. We can call up the data and it's already there. So we call it up and we tell it to perform the cutting. So keep this in mind. There could be some useful conditions for this setting. Now, if you had more than one cutter model by GraphTech, this is where you can filter those cut jobs by the device. So if you have an FC8600, a 9000, some of these different models that GraphTech makes, we're going to be managing cutters and adding all those different models here. But then in each one appropriately, we would be filtering. I just want to see the GraphTech FC8600 jobs for the GraphTech FC8600. I just want to see the 9000 for the 9000 and so on. And that's where you can use this feature. Within the settings, configuring settings for the GraphTech, we also have these choices for cut job settings. And I'll show you if I add a new setting. This is controlling the information for the mark detection specific to this GraphTech cutter, as well as the action that should take place after the cut is completed. Okay. At the bottom, we've got cut layer settings. So depending upon if we want to assign or associate our cut data terminology and identify what tooling type, what type of cut it should make, we can add, I made cut contour. And so I can add that cut data, tell it to use the cutter settings, or use a specific condition, or use these individual settings. So this is something that we can definitely set up and configure here. I'll add another one for a score. And I could say, use condition 4. We can definitely set these up as we like to. Now, what happens is when the file has the cut data associated with a spot color called cut contour or a spot color called score, these conditions are going to be associated. It's going to use that condition 4 or condition 2 or whatever we had set there. Okay. Furthermore, there is a specific hierarchy. If score is just a simple light cut, not all the way through the material, just breaking the surface, and the word cut contour represented possibly a deeper cut or all the way through cut, we can control, as you can see these arrows, we can control these settings, and I can have score happen before my hard through cut. And so there is an order to this layering and cutting. This will be the command signal, the order of the command going over to the cutter. First, it'll know to do all the score, then it'll go through and do the cut contour, which possibly is a deeper cut or like a through cut. So we can think through our order of our data here as well. And again, this is optional. We could leave it as default and then tell the touch panel which information we want to take place. Okay, so that's for our GraphTech. I'll select the SUMA and I'll go to configure. Again, this is a cut to folder. Interesting. We're only sending to a directory. Okay, again, if we're working with some large flatbed cutter model and there's a front end computer to it, we may be working in this scenario and we're sending the information across our network to some hard drive share that's over at the computer that's going to control this particular cutter model. Okay, very convenient. In that case, I may say, sure, automatically forward the file to that directory. And then, of course, we still have the filtering and we still have adding our cut information here. In this example, you'll notice some different terminology, some different words that are here. And this all relates to the type of cutter we're working with. Okay. So I've got my settings here specific for my GraphTech cutter, a landing point, if you will, for my cut data. I've got my SUMA for my SUMA cutter. I've got that added here and configured. Back in my RIP, I've made 2 quick sets, one for the GraphTech, one for the SUMA. Now, basically, we're set right there. We've got our quick set, we've got a landing point and cut server. But there's one more area I want to show you for control, and that is going to be file manage cutters. File manage cutters. That is going to put us offline. And I'll show you if I go to my GraphTech cutter, and I go to configure. All right, here in this configure area, I could now set some parameters. Every cutter manufacturer collaborates and works with Onyx to develop these settings and develop the drivers, if you will, and the controls. So what we see is what we get when we work with those manufacturers. And different models of cutters may have different choices due to their nature. So here you can say, print the Onyx barcode or not, the size or the length of the mark that's going to print, the pattern type, which pattern type do you want to use for your marks? And then we have some controls for a mark X and Y margin and an image X and Y margin. The mark X and Y margin is the edge of the sheet to where the mark is going to print. The image X and Y margin is the edge of the sheet to where the image is going to start. So if we think about this, it's the distance from the mark to the image. And again, you may think I want to be optimized and get the most out of my media, so I want to reduce this as low as I can. There may be some low setting thresholds, a lowest point you can go to. And again, there's going to be like a minimum setting. So you would be able to lower this to an amount that suits you. And again, depending on the cutter and the blade type and so forth, you need to make allowances. We can set the intermediate mark setting as a vertical, horizontal, or none, and then a repeat interval and how thick the mark will be. Very basic data here at GraphTech cutter. Okay, let's investigate the SUMA F series. And if I select that cutter and go to configure, I can see that I have choices for my barcode, none, SUMA, Onyx, or both, top or bottom. Again, mark size, the same with the X and Y margins, printing the intermediates. I did see a question pop up, and the question is, any way to make the intermediate marks go horizontally and vertically? So again, good question. The situation is, and here we have a X and a Y, where we can control this setting, but it depends on the model of the cutter that we're working with. So when we were in GraphTech, let's see, GraphTech cutter, and this is just GraphTech cutter. We just had the intermediate mark for a vertical or horizontal. But when we looked at the Summa, so it gives us more choices. This all depends on that cutter manufacturer, right? And the options that we have. So here we can set an X and a Y and a repeat. Okay, and if you don't want, you can turn off to repeat that intermediate mark. So it's going to depend on the cutter model you're working with. Every cutter manufacturer has their own specifications in this cutter manager setting. So that's going to be something you're going to explore and experiment with at your location for your cutter models that you're working with. But you can see this does give you both in the case of the Summa cutter. Okay, now, if you ever come across it where when you go into your quick sets and you go to select that cutter pull down window where it says none, and you only have like one or two choices there, and you don't see all these others, it just means that someone's gone in and unchecked these cutter models so that you don't see them. Obviously, we have a lot of cutter models we support, and you might say, well, I'm only a GraphTech and I'm only a Summa or whatever model you have. Do I really need to see all these other ones? Well, no, you can turn off the checkboxes. When you disable these checkboxes back in the quick set, in this selection, you would not see all of those choices. So if I disabled, an iCut, I wouldn't see this iCut here because I unchecked it. So keep that in mind. Some of you come across that now and then where it's been possibly cleaned up when the installation was done. Someone's just gone in to be convenient and say, hey, no need to see all these other models. Let's uncheck them. That manage cutter is where you can go check that on to reactivate that. That could be a situation where your future, you buy another, other cutter model and you want to support that.